Board games. We might be talking about how games are about face to face, but we're not gonna shout. Is there even a better place than being with your friends face to face? Around the table, it's such a grace. Board games.
Games.
That's what we're talking about. Board games, board games. I'm not going to shout. Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good whatever it is, wherever you are. 10 a.m. is UK time, time for Busy Beats and Board Game Blether, episode 926, where I thought we'd have a nice little chat about gathering around a table, featuring Pearl Ho
Hello.
uh, and Amar Chandarana.
Hello.
And it's based on something that you said yesterday, Amar, where you said that you were inspired about, wow, we're getting together, we're issuing the online interactions. I mean, not that there's anything wrong with online interactions. I think that have definitely forged friendships in Discord, Twitter, Facebook, all the other things.
Mm.
But and email lets us stay connected. But there's something super lovely about just getting together and having a blether around a table. And hello to Richard Simpson, who shouts, "You've been stealing my guests!"
Morning, Richard.
More than best suggested you, Richard, so you can't really complain. It's the other way
Yeah.
around.
Yeah, I mean, you were on, I think we talked about this, the War Not Wizard show and a whole bunch of other stuff quite recently to show off your stuff. And maybe let's get into who you are as we're talking about recent highlights, living life and seeing the sights, recent highlights, playing games and other lights. So, you are the two people behind Cake of Doom. And what have you been doing recently for it? What's been going on within your lives?
Well, I mean, there's an obvious, Kickstarter last minute prep. We're going live next Friday. So I've been looking at this box a lot and trying to post it everywhere on social media, writing emails
Trusty
to
box?
send, all that fun prep, right? Both digitally and for the in-person aircon where we'll launch it at. Personally, I've got two highlights from yesterday as well. One is I baked a cake for the first time in weeks. It's a Swiss roll, vanilla flavored. And the second is I actually played a board game that wasn't Cake of Doom. I've just been seeing this exact game so often recently, but I actually played Concordia yesterday with my partner, and that was a lot of fun.
Was that your first time?
No, I played it quite a lot. It's sort of my go-to intro of Euro games, but it's first time in, I reckon, half a year.
Yeah, there's so much going on. I mean, the multipliers where it's like, okay, it pushes you hard down a bunch of particular routes, the hand management that forces you to build up this strategy over the course of the game. It is super lovely. And Richard says that, I don't know if, I mean, I don't know if this implies that there's been any editing, because I mean, I don't know if any of that actually happens with We're Not Wizards. But Richard says episodes will be out very soon. Hope you're all well. I'm generally well, thank you. How are you, Richard? And Amar, what have you been up to, Richard? But also Amar, what have you been up to?
Well, Bez, having a great chat with you yesterday, and since then, as we both committed to, I got away from the screen and hung out with my family. Went for some long walks nearby.
Mm-mm. And I didn't get away from the screen as much as I feel I ought to have, but I did spend quite a while just redoing some cards. This is for a game about auctioning cubes after winning an auction to become the auctioneer. And so it's the double layered thing. I think it'll make perfect sense once you've played one round of it. And then there's about 9 rounds in the game lasting 30 minutes. So it's a little bit longer than my usual party game fare. And I'm excited to release that probably at UK Games Expo, testing it again today. What I did do is after cycling down to the bank, hooray to me, I carried on for another half hour and then I cycled, so it was like a good hour and a half cycle. So it wasn't like the whole day, but I did get out. I felt the power as I cycled up the hill. I felt the relief as I just let myself roll down the hill, because then you always get one with the other. And yeah, that was a lovely thing. So let's crack on and talk about a brilliant thing. Brilliant thing. What's a little thing which is brilliant? Brilliant thing. So, Amar.
My brilliant thing is the trusty water bottle. I don't think I need to explain that at all, but I will just in case. I think that water bottles let you take water everywhere, and it means that you never dehydrate anywhere you go, as long as you can obviously. Let me call it water bottle management. As long as you can manage the water in your water bottle, which I feel could be a game mechanism, as I say.
I like this. So basically, what you're saying is it's not just about the presence of the bottle, because we've talked about bottles before, the having a lid, being able to screw it on, putting it in your bag, and liquid doesn't fall out, which is brilliant. Otherwise, you'd be cycling or walking along with this cup or mug. I don't know how it would work. It'd be quite awkward. But it's also about making sure that when you go out of the house, you've got a full bottle. And when every so often you're like, oh, my water's about to finish, I'm going to get some water, making sure you have the water for when you need it. Exactly. And a little bit of effort pays dividends. Would you agree with this, Pearl, or would you like to propose a different brilliant thing?
I think water bottles are brilliant. When I was a child, and I think you both know this, I grew up in Hong Kong, which is quite a hot and humid place, so you do want to have water with you. I used to, the night before, so even more preparation, but I'll fill the water bottle up, I'll leave a little bit of space, and I'll put it in the freezer at home. So the next morning, I have a solid block of ice, more or less. You got to leave the space so it doesn't break your bottle. But then the next day when I go outside, it would slowly melt, but then I would have cold water for quite a while, and it was brilliant. Water bottle.
Then there's water bottle territories, because when I was younger, me and my brother would have to have separate water bottles, because there's no way we were going to share a water bottle with each other.
Oh, no.
I mean,
and I think that it's easy to just say, hey, this is my water bottle. I mean, I don't know anyone else who has bottles that are supposedly tomato juice.
Yeah, very suspicious looking tomato juice, if I'm honest.
I do enjoy my tomato juice. Whenever I sometimes get a delivery from Asda and I get 10 bottles of tomato juice all at once. It's like, fills you up, it feels good, it's thirst quenching, good stuff, and relatively low on the calories when you consider it compared to fruit juices. But water bottles are brilliant. But you know what else is brilliant? The questionably quick questions is the next section. It's not an interrogation, it's just the questionably quick question section. So, yesterday, Amar was subjected to lots of these, Pearl, but I'm going to ask you, what are some things you love about Amar?
Oh, that's a lovely thought. Amar's very dependable. You can always count on him to be there if I fall ill. I fell ill once, and he had to fill in at a con, short notice, just soloing it. That was very trusty. I knew it was going to be okay. I could believe in him. I like that he was the person who organized all the games night. So we actually became friends through our work. We've both moved on now, but he used to organize these game nights that brought us maybe around 10 of us together.
So this would be people from the office?
Yeah. It's quite a strange thing. It was a huge office, so we all technically worked together, but we didn't actually work together. But there was therefore space available, which is very nice. And Amar would bring us all together. That was lovely.
And so that's how you got connected, because you were working in the same office, and then Amar, you were organizing these things, and probably like, yeah, that sounds fun. I'm really into games. But so I want to quickly ask, what makes a good game for you? I mean, I know that on your bio, Pearl, you've said you love both Euro games and also social deduction. Amar, you're more into the party games. But if you could imagine your ideal game that isn't Cake of Doom.
I mean, this maybe sounds a bit simplistic, but that I have fun playing it. And I think that's why it's sort of, I like to say I like a full range of games. And there's different types of fun, but it's a game, right? So it's supposed to be enjoyable. Sometimes maybe it's thought-provoking. Sometimes maybe it's just a bit of a laugh. Sometimes maybe it helps me bond with other people at the table. It could be all sources of fun, but at the end of the day, it's meant to be enjoyable.
So you're focusing on the thoughtfulness, the laughter around the table, and the bonding. And how about you, Amar? What's, sparks a good game for you?
I think an interesting game for me is a game that tells you a bit about the other players. So I'm thinking of and Pearl, it's one of the games that you have got. It's the game where someone says a random phrase and you got to put your cards down from what's in
Dixit?
Dixit, yes, of course. I love Dixit because you just get an insight into what people think of when you say a word or a phrase. So that's a good one. There was another one that we played at a board game cafe where people had to guess what you got a category, so like Star Wars, and you had to guess the word based on it. You had like a lever. I'm explaining this terribly. Oh, you muted yourself.
Sorry, that was me. There was a bit of background noise, and I was trying to work out where it was coming from. I do apologize, Pearl.
No, I was going to say Wavelength. I think that's the game Amar's thinking of.
Wavelength, yeah. So you see if you're all on the same wavelength, and that I really enjoyed that. I love, these games with a word association, and you get an insight into other people and how they think.
It's really interesting because, as you say about word association or concept association, because Wavelength isn't about the word matching the other word. It's more about, hey, how good is this thing? Or how political is this thing? Or is this an overrated or underrated movie? So it's about almost sharing your ideologies. And I think that for a game that's about getting to know the other players, I would argue that there's currently Wavelength is definitely one of the best.
We played it with Amar's now wife as well, and it was quite interesting to watch a mix of people who know each other quite well, and then there were people who we didn't necessarily know at the table. I think one of our other friends brought his girlfriend, who I've met for the first time. So this is the person I've just met, and there's a fun mix because you've got people who you're like, if I make a clue, I think Amar knows how I feel about Star Wars or board games, but what the other people think, I would say, right? So it's fun even if you already know the other people quite well, and they surprise you.
So it sounds like you've got this shared passion for things that are, have a bit of levity, have a bit of absolute joy, and bring connections, which I guess does bring us to the main topic, because, as I always say, please do comment, ask questions, fun, like, follow. And it's about that face-to-face connection around the table. And Amar, you said this was what made you want to start this game, what made you want to engage with this as a creative, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it speaks to the context in which we did it. We started this game in lockdown at a time where arguably we were all forced online. We were forced to sit in front of screens. And so I guess I had this, really, we both had this drive to do something that wasn't extremely screen-based. And funnily enough, we did end up doing most of our early playtesting in front of a screen, but nevertheless, the end concept and the joy it's supposed to bring is largely an offline experience.
I wonder, can we have a little bit of back and forth about the value of this offline experience? Because for sure, I mean, I feel massive value in speaking to you right now, and in people that, chuck in the comments. It's lovely to see Richard pop up, or Timmy, or whoever, pops in and chooses to spend a bit of their time with us. And I love that conversation, that sharing of ideas. But there is something magical about sharing the same physical space. Would you agree, Pearl?
Yeah, definitely, yeah. And I think you see this in other aspects of life, right? It's like work, right? Work's become so much more virtual, with the pandemic and everything. And there are many advantages to it. But at the same time, you lose something from not ever being in person. If that's the mode that you work in. At least personally, I find it that way. I think one interesting thing I found is a balance, or having the option of doing things virtually, because board games really blew up virtually over the pandemic. I suppose that doesn't have to be the only reason, but it just gave us a lot more options. A lot more people started being aware of it. There were more platforms and all that. And as someone who has friends like in other parts of the world, that is valuable, because now I have the option. We don't really have the option of being face to face, but now I have an alternative way of doing things. And it was easier to get people on a video chat, even, which was something we could have always done, but it was, for some reason, became a more acceptable option.
But then the question arises, I mean, why don't we just do the video chats? I mean, why is there value in, me coming over to you, Pearl, and playing Go in person? I mean, why not just play Go? Because there's plenty of servers where we could play, right?
We could, yeah. I wonder if it's a little bit of like when you get on a video call for a specific purpose, you tend to do that purpose. Now you might say bye, you might chat for a minute, but then that's it, right? You end it. But you lose that when you came over. We chatted a bit. When you got here, oh, how was your journey? Let me find my Go board. Feel free to play with the cats while I do that. There's a lot more of these more organic interactions just come about with physically being in a space. Maybe it's a catalyst for those type of interactions. But what do you think?
I had a very similar conversation with a colleague who talked about how pre-pandemic, when we were all in the office, we would get to know each other better through the nature of the small conversations that took place between the meetings, where you feel like you can talk about your life and what's going on, for you personally. Whereas on those video calls, they tend to have a very specific purpose. I mean, even the conversations that Pearl and I have, I talked yesterday about our Friday conversations. They are agenda driven. And we do have lots of other conversations, but primarily they're kind of driven around the agenda that we've preset for ourselves. Whereas I know that our face-to-face interactions are very different. They still have a purpose. We go to film or take photos or discuss something, but so much happens around that I think it's easy to miss.
It's a really interesting point, and a lot of what you've said, Pearl, is about sharing the same physical space, because I could be playing with something and then showing you, oh look, this is my red bum bag, it just happens to be a close item. Or, oh, yesterday I actually splashed out and I bought this kind of expensive lipstick, and I'm going to see how it works out, because I felt like, the previous one that I've been using for a while, it was, so I bought, free things because it was buy free, get the cheapest free. And I'd been recommended this particular brand by someone. And, we can share that, but that's a bit of a unusual thing to do. I mean, I'm aware that it's my show, so I can just go on all these crazy tangents. But on a actual work meeting, anything you say, everyone will hear it equally. And I think this is the other thing, that if there's a meeting with the three of us, or, well, three is a bad example, with 4 or 5 of us, then anything I say will be heard by everyone. Whereas if there's 4 people around the table, I can be looking here and then having a little bit of a conversation. Those 2 people can be having a conversation, and that can happen naturally. It's not like you have to toggle sliders to move closer to the person, or, I mean, in theory, you could do that on Discord by changing the volume of everyone, but it would be a real faff, and no one really works like that. And so it's just like, okay, one person's talking at a time, that's it. Whereas in real life, hey, we can have the conversation, and if you ever disengage, and like, you'll be polite to some extent, but then at some points you might be starting your own little conversation, right?
Yeah, that's actually a really good point. And I play role playing games as well. I think I've mentioned to both of you. So I have one weekly game where it's in person, and then I play in another one where it's virtual, because some of the people who play aren't based in London. And both are fun, But you do notice this, right? But it's a lot easier to have side conversations. Maybe it's a in joke with another player. Maybe I just be like, oh hey, by the way, can I do this next round, or is that not allowed? Like it could be small things like that, and it's a lot easier to stay engaged when you're not actively the one speaking or doing something when it's in person. There's just something about that maybe that's how the human attention span works. I don't know. Yeah.
I also think that online interactions, they have a different like code of conduct as such. You know, when you're all around a table, it's physically impossible to just turn off your camera and go and, you know, answer your door. Like there's just things that happen online that don't happen physically, and there are things that happen physically that don't happen online.
Sorry, are you saying that I shouldn't answer my door if the bell rings?
No, I think that's absolutely fine. But what I'm saying is that there is a different code of conduct, a different kind of level of expectation.
I absolutely agree that the code of conduct is different. I'm just not sure that I agree with that answering your door is a valid thing, because whether it's a work meeting online or whether it's in person having a game night, I think that either way I would be answering the door if it was like, oh, I need to answer the door.
Yeah. No, sure. They're both acceptable, but I guess what I'm saying is that what is acceptable, I think, is slightly different online compared to in person. But when you have an in-person meeting, so if I give you a work example, when you're in the office and you're having an in-person meeting, it is considered quite rude to open up your laptop and start firing off emails if you're literally in a meeting with a presentation. But
Yes.
online, that is happening every single meeting, and it's kind of much more accepted. I just think that the way people behave and what is acceptable, it is different, and it's not always easy to pick that out.
I do agree with you that there's definitely an assumption that most people are multitasking and it's okay. I mean, just now we've been having this side conversation with, oh, there's some troubleshooting. And hello, Jane, who says, I think the difference is the turning the camera off. It's easy to pretend you're still engaged and not answering the door or doing something else. I feel like maybe we should sort of allow people to do other stuff. Like if someone's doodling at the table, I don't think that that should be seen as a terrible thing. If someone's doing something slightly different at the same time, I don't think it should be seen as, oh, you can't possibly multitask. Some people work that way. Some people do draw while they're engaged with people, and it doesn't mean that they're necessarily paying you any less attention. And frankly, I could be doing physically nothing but have a lot going on in my mind. So what's going on physically versus how much attention I'm giving you doesn't necessarily have a direct correlation. But yeah, that's something that I would be interested to know if we could almost bring back. And as we explore these two avenues, maybe we could get the best of both.
That would be the dream, and I think that mix and that option, right? As you were talking about being acceptable to do those things, that option is important. Jane was talking about camera on and off, and I had this horrible virtual training once. So this is pre-pandemic, and it's virtual. Everyone joins the call, and there's a trainer on, and she's running a session, and she literally went through the screen one by one and called. There were like 20 people in the session, called every single person's name and forced every single person to turn their camera on and say something one by one. And she persisted even if it was very clear that person's gone off somewhere. Like for a whole minute, she'll just keep going, say it's Bess, right? Like Bess, can you turn my camera off? Bess, please respond, Bess. And that went on for like half an hour of a 1 hour session. It was by far the worst training I've ever been in my life. It was just unnecessary. It was counterproductive. Now, obviously that's an extreme example, but the balance and the sort of trusting people to be adults and autonomous beings is definitely an important part of it.
I think that before we get too distracted, I would like to chat about the non-digital nature of board games and what it feels like when we're maybe sharing a space, but we have a screen in the middle. And I believe this started with XCOM, and yeah, it was quite a few years ago. It's all Reiner Knizia has explored a lot of app-driven stuff way back in the past, which was little computers managing things, but actually having something on your phone that you look at with a screen feels very different to something that you just gaze at periodically. And of course, there was the original Dark Castle, which has been remade with Return to Dark Castle. But this feels like the game that popularized it and said, here you are, you can put this onto your smartphone, which everyone has. How do you feel about this? Is this because there's been a lot of backlash from some people, but it's going to keep happening with Chronicles of Crime, Unlocked. What's your personal opinion, Pearl?
Yeah, no, I'll preface by saying I haven't played XCOM myself. It's a tough one. I think again it's not for everyone, but I wouldn't think badly or think less of people who do like to take that option. I think there are times where you choose to hit in person and using a phone can be enhancing of however you're choosing to do something together, right? To give a different example, I was in Singapore a couple of years ago. It was a gathering of a group of friends, and there were people I know, people I don't know. So it was quite a mixer. And there were maybe 12, 15 people in the room at this point. And someone suggested we play a game as a way of doing something while bonding. And we played, I think it was called Mr. White, or maybe it's called Forgetful Spy, but it's a social game where you're trying to guess a word, basically. And to facilitate that, there's an app and it's free. And I think there's a website as well. And you go on it, and because everybody had a phone, it was actually quite an easy way to facilitate having a secret and not having to faff around with papers and messing up and somebody glancing at an accident. So it's not technology can be a helpful thing, right? At the same time, I just think I quite like that physical aspect of not having something digital. Like I actually quite like it when there's no screen at all, just because I look at screens enough all day. So it's a personal preference, but I do think it's important that it doesn't go too digital when the point is you've come together in person and made an effort.
What? Yeah, what's your thoughts, Amar, on this?
If I take a slightly harder line, I mean, certainly there is a place for apps on and games and that interaction. But if I think about myself personally, one of the great things about board games is that I take my phone and I put it to the side or I put it into my pocket, and I focus on that game and on those interactions. I think I'm someone who's easily distracted. So if I was, half on the physical game, half on the virtual game, it would be very easy for a text to come in, a notification, something like that, and ultimately take me out of the moment of the game and of the other people. And if you were playing a 4-player game, for example, and two of you were taken out of the moment, then 50% of your contingent is just doing what they could be doing on their sofa. So for me, I think there is a place. I imagine a world where augmented reality comes into it, virtual reality comes into it, and board games could be enhanced in very imaginative ways. But ultimately, I go to board games for that offline connection, especially if you go to a board game cafe or something like that.
I mean, for all the people who say virtual apps and all these things are taking us away from each other, couldn't you argue that Euro games and systems driven games are already kind of doing that? Because compared to party games or games with massive social interaction or storytelling or things where what I say has to be responded to by everyone and will impact the actual game, if it's um, I mean, at an extreme example, something like number nine, where we could play completely asynchronously and have exactly the same experience from a mechanical point of view.
Or does it bring people together when they wouldn't have been together at all, regardless? It's people bond and interact in different ways. Some people really like to talk, and some people actually prefer to be a bit more quiet, and even the same person might feel differently on a different day, right? Some days I want to talk to everyone at the party. Some days I just kind of want to be in the group and nod and maybe say a word now and then. But that doesn't mean I'm not participating or still sort of benefiting somehow. So maybe there's something about, even if you're playing chess or number 9 or a Euro game, that you're still around a table, and there's still something about being next to someone, even if you might not be saying many words or interacting very directly.
But do you think that there is greater value in greater interaction in the game? Because when you compare chess and number 9, those are, whilst they're still abstract, and while you might not be saying anything during either of them, there's no denying that in chess, I'm interacting a lot more with that person, and they need to respond to where I put my bishops and queens and whatnots, and you need to respond to how I respond to you, and then I need to respond to your response to my response to yours, and so forth. Whereas in number 9, it's a case of being alone together, which is, I'm not saying there's something bad about it, but is there greater value? What is the extra value? Does it bring people together more to have the focus be on the people and the faces and the interaction? I mean, obviously, trading and auctions are, you know, it's not necessarily a reflection of your values or your personality, but well, I guess there is a little bit of personality in there. Are you a quick thinker? Are you going to jump in with a big bid? Are you going to, when you're being the auctioneer, are you going to ham it up a bit? How much buffery are you going to do?
I think for me, the answer to that question is two things. It's one about the context and it's one about the preferences. So if when I met my wife, well, one of the dates we went on was to a board game cafe. Now, can you imagine a first date, especially, where you chose to play a game that required zero talking and zero interaction? It probably isn't the thing to choose. I think in the end we played Codenames Duet. So, and we often choose high interaction games, but I can imagine times now where we might just sit in a room and read, and we're reading different books, and we're not even talking to each other, and that could happen for an hour. But I don't value that interaction any less. It's a different context. It's a different preference at a different time. So yeah, for me, it's all about context and preference. There's no greater value from one or the other.
And I do love what Jane is saying here. Parallel play is an important form of interacting in autistic culture. Many board gamers are neurodivergent, in my experience. And yeah, that's true. For a lot of people, having something that's overly constrained, overly combative, overly interactive, might just be a bit overwhelming. And I think there is definitely joy in just sharing this moment. I mean, I said on my stream how on Thursday I shared a bit of time with someone and just sitting on 2 seats, and then I was working on stuff and she was working on stuff, but it felt different to us just being separate because we were together, we were supporting each other, we were able to look over and oh yeah, you're still there. Hey, it's nice to see you. And it so this feels like a cop-out answer, but is the ultimate answer that we just need to have everything, that there is no greater intrinsic value in fingering the cubes as opposed to clicking on Board Game Arena or whatever?
I wonder if you need, as humans, we need a minimal level of feeling the cubes, and so while both are valuable, you almost can't I'll probably live a life fine, balanced and healthy without the ability to digitally play games with friends, and many people have, right, in the history of Earth. But I'm not sure the reverse is true, right? And that's, I mean, I'm no scientist, but isn't there something biological about needing the physical aspect of connecting with people, at least for most people?
You mean like sharing the space?
Yeah, exactly. It feels like you need some extent of that, but after maybe a minimal level, then sort of the variety of experience are no more intrinsically valuable than each other.
I don't know if we'll be able to draw a conclusion at a macro level. I think for each individual person, there is a ratio of online to offline, or there's a ratio of touching the cube to not touching the cube. And that's going to vary person by person. So for me, there probably is a right answer. Like, I'm probably someone who would prefer the physical, the interaction. I'm going to be high on that, and much lower on the online interactions. For someone else, that balance will be entirely different, I imagine. And you got to do what's right for you. You got to optimize for your needs and preferences. I think that's the conclusion I would draw.
I mean, I'll say that for me, being with people in a shared space is super important. It doesn't mean that, I mean, I'm sure that, like, when I saw you, Pearl, like, we had some sort of physical contact, whether that was, I can't remember whether we bumped elbows or how we greeted or if there was a hug. I can't remember. The truth is that I am a very tactile person, although that has been reduced a lot since COVID, because I'm aware that there's a lot of things still going around, and I'm now a lot more careful about um basically I never shake hands anymore, because to me handshaking is almost the worst of both sides. It doesn't feel like a close human connection compared to a hug, and you still get probably just as much chance of transmitting stuff as a hug, I would say. I mean, Jane's probably better able to say if this is correct or not, being an actual medical professional. But yeah, conversely, for me, an elbow bump, like doing the elbow dance, which has the elaborate nature of it, and seeing someone else going, okay, I'm doing this, you're going to tap that elbow, now that foot, now the jazz hands. It feels like we've engaged in this ritual, and for the rest of the time, I will say that years ago, I was a lot more awkward at conversations. I mean, I do, being able to run a conversation is a skill for sure. And having a game, sometimes a game that we're not fully focused on, sometimes a game which, yes, this is trading. Here's why we might negotiate. Oh, here's Carcassonne. This is why we might interact and negotiate. And um, these were games that gave me an idea of how it built up a structure. And James says handshakes are definitely worse than hugs for sharing germs. There you go. So there you go. Stop doing the handshakes. Just hug everyone. That feels so. Yeah. And when I play games on Board Game Arena, it's usually with strangers with little to no interaction in the chat box. It's pretty much 100% about the game. When I play games in real life, the enjoyment is about 50-50 between games and the people I'm sharing my time and space with. And I think that's a really interesting thing because, yeah, I recently went through most of the games on Board Game Arena. I still have about 60 left to go. But most of it, it's like, yeah, when you've got this voice message and then you can just be chatting to each other on Discord or whatever simultaneously, that does make it a thoroughly social experience, I would argue. And that did get me through Christmas when I had COVID and I couldn't do anything else. And being in a chat box with friends got me through Christmas 2021 when I also had COVID, annoyingly. Seems to have become an annual tradition. Not one I'm a big fan of, I must admit. But yeah, any thoughts, Amar? Pearl?
It's really interesting that we're talking about, I think, playing online, playing board games online with people we don't know in real life. So people you probably wouldn't have invited to your home to play a game with necessarily. I don't think I've ever played board games online with people I don't know. There might have been sort of friends of friends, but there was always somebody who I sort of made specific plans with, and I would meet in person if we were able to. Maybe that's one bit I'm missing out on, because I guess as Shane put it, it is it is a different probably type of enjoyment you'd be looking for. And I guess that is different to, say, going to a board games cafe meetup where there might be people I don't know that I can play games with. It's a different type of interaction. So maybe something to try next time I am down with illness. Hopefully never, but it's a good idea.
I think in the video gaming space, it's quite common to play online with people that you don't know that could be anywhere in the world, and I think there part of the appeal is to, put your skill and intelligence and strategy up against other people in the world who are sharing the same game. So they obviously enjoy it and enjoy the mechanics of that game, but you're not necessarily there for the interaction with someone you know. You're there to challenge each other and prove your worth. Inevitably, if you are on a chat, you will start talking and have some banter and things like that. But I think more of it is about, or some of it sometimes is just about putting your skills up against someone else. Can you beat other people in the world?
And some of it is just saying, I mean, in the West, I think there's a great focus on absolute merit, like what is your score in this test? Whereas I think that I know in Japan that there's a slightly greater focus on the relative merit of where did you rank when everyone took this test. Not just what was your percentage that you got correct, but where were you compared to everyone else? And it's like, okay, I know my place and that's where I am. And when I play online, it's like, okay, it turns out that I'm terrible at Barrage. I mean, sure, I've not spent any time on it yet, but it also turns out that I'm really struggling with this. And you get to know humanity. I mean, learning that apparently I'm really good at photosynthesis. I'm still unbeaten at that. And also my shelfie, so if anyone wants to challenge me. But yeah, my shelfie has a lot more luck, to be fair. So I'm sure if people keep challenging me, then I'll eventually get beaten. But yeah, it's learning, oh, wow, that person's really good at abstract games in general because I keep seeing their name pop up and they beat me basically every time, except for this one game when I finally beat them. And having that regular opponent, it feels like there's this human connection. But I would like to move on to testing because whilst we've all done some degree of testing online, it means that it's more available, especially during 2020, 2021. I think, and even now, if you wanted to, you could test your game every day of the week online if you really worked at it. Whereas if you want to test physically, you are constrained by who is close to you, who is around you, who can you actually meet up with. And you don't have this teleportation device that basically figuratively teleports me to everywhere in the world and brings us together in this shared virtual space. Do you think that there's a danger with testing online? Because then you make games that, sure, they might work online, but they might not, but you might avoid games that work brilliantly in person, but not so well online. Conversely, you might, just not notice small issues like the amount of shuffling that's required being an actual hassle, or the way that things fall physically on the table.
I mean, definitely, right? There are things, given that you're designing a game that is meant to be play in person, I don't think you can get away with testing only virtually. You can definitely do a mix. Like, to give you an example, and Amar talked about how we play tested Kick of Doom only virtually for quite long at the start. But once we started having physical prototypes, there are things you realize, right? Like, one thing is, we made quite a deliberate choice at one point to have 2 draw decks, and they have different card backs. And we meant for those card backs to be public, so you can kind of see with some information what the other people have. But that bit of it is really quite hard to test online. Some tools allow you to see that, but you might have to make quite a deliberate effort. Whereas in real life, there's no effort. That's just part of being together.
Well, you might have to say, oh, could you fan out your cards a little bit more so that I could see?
That's true. There's a little bit of that, but the cards are there, and like the act of, I wonder what they have or whether they have cards is a lot easier to peek across than to have to go, sorry, actually, how many are in your hand and which ones are those ones, depending on the tool you've got. So there are aspects that are easy in real life or that works a lot different in terms of the dynamic of it when it's in person versus virtual. I can see Amar really wants to chime in there. Go on.
No, it's only because I'm thinking about how people play the game, and it was designed so physically with the intention that you can see the card backs. But I do enjoy people who, about 4 rounds in, decide, I don't want to provide this information anymore, put all of their cards together, and refuse to show the backs of any of their cards, which we don't have a rule around, but it is slightly ungamesmanlike. But I do find that very funny when people do that. What I did find interesting. Sorry, Bez, you're on mute.
I like it when the rules do say clearly, this is what you can ask and this is the information you have to provide. I'm fairly sure that in Kitty Cataclysm I say, if someone asks you how many cards you have to say honestly how many you have. That is the one thing. And, you can lie about what's in your hand. You could threaten people with a card that you don't have at all.
Yeah.
But that is a big part of the game, and that would feel very different. So to leave that up to the players makes me feel like you're letting the game be played in a worse version. You're making it almost more fragile in a sense.
That's interesting. We have, I guess, taken the line that ultimately the game is about sabotage and trickery, and there's a bit of bluffing in there as well. And so, it's a choice of how you want to play. Because even in the choices you make, you can choose to be more mean. You can choose to sabotage people for no personal benefit, just because you're really frustrated at them and want to take them out. That's a perfectly viable game choice. The rules don't specifically say that you are forced to reveal information, but certainly my play style is to give that information. But I did find there were many aspects actually that physically were different from virtually. So one of the things is when you look at your cards virtually, you tend to see the entire card and they're all laid out in front of you. Whereas when you hold a hand, no one holds a hand like that. You hold a hand with all the cards in one hand and you fan it out. So the way we design the cards did have to change for fanning, because fanning isn't something you do on exactly. You do it like that. So we had to think about, oh, actually, do we need to redesign this card because people fan cards? You don't. I'm yet to see someone hold their cards like this in a perfectly vertical line with all 10 of them so they can see. You kind of run out.
I don't think you even could do that unless you had some amazing card holder. I think that as soon as I think I could probably do about 2 per hand if I really worked, but there quickly need to be a bit of crossover even with bridge size cards.
So
yeah, definitely interesting.
I think there's another element of the whole testing online or in person thing, and that is that when I try to test online, I've generally found that the audience you would get are the designers. You could get some people who are quite into the hobby, who plays games quite a bit, but I found it very difficult to find people who to play online with who are sort of casual gamers or might not even play much games, right? And that's by virtue of someone having decided to play something online or to have the tool or to be up for playing a game virtually. That's actually a physical game, and it's when you test in person, if you find the right occasion and events, you can test with people that are very hard to find online otherwise, like younger children or people who just wander into the board games convention with their friend but have only heard of Monopoly. And that variety of audience could be very valuable. I think for us, it certainly is valuable to have the different types of people because Cake of Doom is a very broad appeal game.
And you also talked about how testing online lets you virtually zap to anywhere in the world. And I was thinking to myself, does that mean that it's a more efficient way? You don't have the half an hour, 1 hour travel time each way to do your testing. But what I also find when you're doing online testing is you spend a lot more time explaining to people the mechanics of the platform often. How do I pick this up? How do I shuffle? How do I draw? So some platforms are really well known, very common. Lots of people can pick them up. But especially when we were looking for casual gamers, it did tend to be, you do spend more time explaining how to pick things up, which you obviously do not do in person.
I mean, when online testing became a big thing in early 2020, I know Gil Hova wrote an essay about it, saying to everyone, yeah, you are going to spend maybe 20% extra on whatever you use, and just call that the virtual tax and assume that your game will be 20% faster. Of course, there are small things like shuffling a deck, which takes 1 second online, but might take a minute to do in person. But I think that the type of people you get, you're absolutely right, Pearl, that the people you get are going to vary so much more in person. I spoke to Mar yesterday about playing Questable in National Theatre, where myself and Shu Ting were joined by two couples. And then soon we were playing a 4-player game with each of the other couples playing as one person, if you know what I mean. And even though this wasn't officially a playtest, and I didn't think it was appropriate for me to ask them too many questions about how they felt, although I would have loved to ask them to grade certain degrees of difficulty and what they thought, especially as they were on their way to go to a play and had to rush off. I could observe, I could learn so much just from seeing them. And that's another part of it, being able to observe the physical, what does this person look like. I have done some testing where, rather than, like, when lockdown started, I tried all the virtual things and found it wasn't quite for me. I feel like I gave it a proper go, and then myself and Ellie, we started a thing where we were on video chat, and then it was a private thing. So the idea was that we would focus mainly on things like roll and writes and things where it can be done on video chat. So you still get to see, oh, what's that person looking at? But I mean, if I look over there, you don't know what I'm looking at. Maybe I'm making a note. Maybe I'm distracted by a cat. Maybe there's a tree that's blown over. Maybe I'm just reading a book and I've got the book held up in my other hand. Maybe you have no idea what's going on. Whereas in real life, you get these clues, you get these ideas, you understand how I'm reacting to you. And that's also within playing a game, you don't get these physical verbal signals as clearly. I mean, sure, you get a noise, but if someone says, ah, well, did that noise come from Pearl? Did it come from Amar? Did it come from Jane? I don't know, unless the voice is distinct enough. Whereas in real life, hopefully using the fact that I have 2 ears, I'll be able to tell which direction it came from.
Yeah, and so this is really slightly off topic because we're talking about testing, but I was just thinking about online versus in person. And a friend of mine just played Among Us in a group when we were sort of during COVID, and they never usually play games. That's sort of the first exposure to the idea of like social deduction. And then later on, sort of in real life, there's a sort of people meeting up. I said, you're going to come play with some games? That, oh, I don't know. I'm like, it's like Among Us, except, we've got actual cards and stuff. I think we were playing Werewolf or something like that. So it's almost that exposure that brought them to in-person gaming. And they were commenting about how it's the same core concept, but it works differently, and there's like different tactics. Like when we were playing virtually, if you didn't know what to say, oh, I was caught on mute, or it's a lot easier to hide. So your physical response of lying, whereas the person you're like, then everyone goes, yeah, that guy's the spy. So yeah, the physical reaction and observations is a big part of games sometimes.
Yeah, especially as you say, not just in social deduction, but in auctions. Like if you see someone's face, well, if I don't really want this thing, could I bid slightly more just so that they bid more and be mean? And in a real life, maybe I'm able to study their face and get some signal. I mean, some people have really good poker faces, but some people don't. And that's, again, part of the joy of gaming. That, I think, is removed. The last thing that I thought worth mentioning before we start wrapping it all up is acknowledging what you said about the enforcement of rules of, okay, you can show the card back, so you can hide it in. And just for the record, if I was playing Cake of Doom I would personally check with the group. That would be my approach, because I would say, well, how does everyone else feel? Because if people feel like this should be a memory game, then I'm going to not give other people any advantage. But if everyone feels like, yeah, this should be visible, that would be my marginal preference. But as soon as one person goes, well, I've got to do the same as well, because I'm going to play to win, but I'm going to play to win within whatever the people agree, because I think always there's a layer of rules on top of whatever the game says. For example, I've never seen a game that tells me that I can't punch everyone else in the face, but I've yet to actually see that happen in a game, thankfully. So yeah, hooray! There are some, yeah.
We'll be sure to write it down.
Or that you can walk around a table and look at everybody's hand subtly.
Yeah.
Yes, you aren't allowed to literally dance on the table to distract people and then just peer over while you're dancing. Yeah, the idea of this, how can I put it? The enforcement of rules. Online, it feels like there are certain rules that this is the way that it has to be, because you can see this information or you can see that information. I mean, for example, if I'm playing turn-based Sushi Go, I'm assuming that the other person is going to make notes. If I'm playing it on Board Game Arena, that's what I assume. Because for me, if I play it in real life, then the memory of what's in the hand is a big part of the game. And if I'm playing it with days between turns, well, no way I'm going to remember. So I better write down what was in my hand. And then it does become a lot more tactical. But is that something that people want? Well, I kind of have to assume that that's the game we're playing, right?
Yeah, I mean, I like it of having sort of almost unspoken rules, as you said, and we talked a lot about sort of what's right, whether something has better than another, and I think there's an element of that, right? Basically, you can try to play Sushi Go very tactically, or you can just kind of not think too hard about it. And one is probably not intrinsically better than the other for people in general, but it's down to you and also the group and the context that you have. It's a bit of a cop-out answer, but I do think it's true.
I mean, it gets back to the whole point of it's worth communicating with people to ask, what do you want out of this experience? At the end of this experience, are you just wanting to understand the game rules a bit better? Are you wanting to feel like we've explored this possibility space together? Are you just wanting to share this moment? Are you wanting to see the most dramatic plays possible, regardless of whether they win or not? Or are you really invested in it being a challenge of a pit of wits of you against everyone else at the table? And you could argue that if the people who really just want those big dramatic moments play with the people who want the real challenge, then they're not going to have a good time, because the people who want the challenge will be like, hey, why are you doing this crazy thing? That's not helping you win. And then, yeah.
But I think that's bringing those different styles together is what makes the game interesting. I might want a challenge, but if someone else is, going for the crazy moves, then part of my challenge is, how do I win this, despite the fact that there's someone absolutely insane here who is randomly working in a way that I cannot anticipate, and therefore I have to change and optimize my strategy for unanticipable. Maybe that's not really a word, for actions that I'm not able to anticipate as easily. It just introduces a new challenge to the game, and they enjoy their moment of insanity. And that's perfectly fine.
I guess it's almost a bit like I'm starting to think maybe a game is sort of a way of setting certain parameters around sort of the type of thing you could do, the type of behavior you are allowed, quote unquote, to have. So I might define how dramatic a moment could be or when you're allowed to do it and so on. But it's obviously not 100% setting exactly what you do. So it defines a space, like the set of rules under which people can make their own choices based on what they want, the type of people they are, how they feel that day. And the game is providing a framework under which to interact.
Absolutely. I mean, games do offer a possibility space, a set of affordances, a set of restrictions, and you can go through a game making perfectly legal moves, but something that would probably be a bit annoying. I mean, you could play a game and just pass every turn, and then it feels like, okay, why are you even here? Or you could play a game and, um, yeah, but there's definitely that gets to the heart of what games are, and I think it's really interesting. Jane does say random crazy moves often show a level of disengagement with the actual game that I often find off-putting. I kind of agree in that, let's say I'm playing photosynthesis, okay? I understand that if someone gets blocked out, it can be a miserable game. And if it's two players, then I might say, hey, I might start if you and I played photosynthesis, I would. I don't know if you've played it before, but if you haven't, and we played in person, I would offer you so many. I would offer you all the takesy backsies you wanted because I know the game quite well and I understand the ramifications. And if you were amenable to it, I would say, hey, do you mind if I give you a bit of wee advice here? So, like, just to point out that in the corners, you're going to get uninterrupted light for 3 turns, and on the side 2 turns. I'm like, hey, just remember that this is the way that these go. But like, you don't want to overload the other person with strategy when they're still learning the rules as well. So it's a balance. But maybe we go halfway through and then we're playing 3 players or 4 players, and someone's just like, oh, well, I'm kind of out of the game. Now, this is a difficult situation because what do they do? Do they now start thinking, okay, I'm going to try and get a bunch of get all of my small trees out just because at least that feels like I've done something and at least I've managed to do this. Um, it feels like maybe the game's failed at some level. It feels like maybe I've got to say I have a problem with games where one person not playing to win can kind of ruin the game. So in Snake Oil, for example, where you know exactly what each person said, and you'll say, "Well, I'm going to give the point to that person," and I'll give the point. You can play against spirits and kind of ruin the game. And one thing that I'm proud of is that in Yogi, even though it seems a really silly game, I mean, there's no way to ruin the game unless you actually start touching other people. As long as you aren't touching other people or blowing wind on them or trying to blow their cards off with your breath or something, there's nothing to say, oh, I'm doing this and I'm just getting in your way. Because it's when myself and Pearl maybe we're going for a victory and we're playing this game and we're engaged in this, okay, who's going to do this better move? But then suddenly, out of nowhere, I'm not, this is totally hypothetical, so this doesn't bear any relationship to what's how Amar might play. But then Amar jumps in and says, you know what, I'm going to build up all my forces here just for the sake of it. And there was no rational reason for Amar to do that in the context of the motivations that the game provides. And then by doing that, you're knocking one of us out of contention. And that doesn't feel satisfying to me or Pearl because we're thinking, well, the person who won, it was the kingmaker situation. But yeah, I feel like that's something that just happens. Yeah, that's not an online versus real life thing. That can just happen wherever. So, is there anything else like? And Yogi says Yogi challenge modes where you try and disrupt your opponents could be quite fun, though.
Yeah, I think there's a difference between sort of disruption or interaction by design, and that might make sense, versus, as you were saying, right, there's just disruptive behavior that were there against the incentives of the game.
And it's interesting because in a game like Roots, for example, I will say that Roots can be a horrible experience if you're playing with meanies and jerks, as can most games. But I would say that lower interaction games are more resilient to that. I mean, I could play number nine with basically anyone, and unless they're literally screaming in my face, I'm not going to be that bothered by these people. And by the end of it, based on the conversation, I'll probably know whether I want to play something longer and more involved. Whereas if we were playing, I mean, I'm not so fan of old school Risk, but Risk Legacy, to my mind, is actually a totally solid game, and kudos to it. But Risk Legacy, Root, both of these rely on the player politics to ping down the person in the lead. In Root, if someone's playing the Vagabond and you don't hit and no one hits them, they will win the game. Someone needs to say, okay, I am hitting the Vagabond, I'm doing the bit for the team, please let me have this extra space. You need to have that negotiation possibility. The Vagabond needs to be hit twice during the game, even though it doesn't really offer the person who's hitting them much of an advantage. And so people need to do that. And if I mean, yeah, the alliance is there, then at some point somebody's say, oh my gosh, this is getting too big. I'm going to probably lose this fight, but can we make a pact that I'll do that and then you all lay off me for 2 turns? Can we promise that? And then people are like, okay, fine, if you go and sort out this alliance in these spaces. And games rely on that. I mean, high interaction games rely on that. And those kinds of negotiations, I think the key thing is that they're easier to manage. It's a sort of trade, this sort of negotiation. It gets back to you can have small discussions, pockets of discussion, right?
Yeah, and it's making that interaction easy, and that's often, I find the case that's often a bit easier in person. Like with Kick of Doom, if I go back to our baby, so to speak, there's a little bit of, it's just not quite Roots or Risk Legacy, but we quite often have similar thing where players will sort of almost negotiate, be like, hey, we're gonna stop that bribe, so I'll put down 1, can you put down 2, we just need 1 more. And you have a lot of that, and that can be a bit chaotic, and you can have people who just sort of want to do it for fun or want to do it for revenge, right? And but the game sort of expects and relies on that interaction and that rationale that may not be entirely sort of numbers rational as part of the gameplay, which plays out differently in person than virtually usually. So yeah.
What I do find interesting though is that being online does force you to talk one at a time, because 2 at a time talking just doesn't work. And sometimes I do find that a bit more organized, and you do get that kind of collaboration. When there's 2, 3 side conversations going, they can tend to go away and not be as easy to coordinate and bring back to the game.
Yeah, like we've talked about a lot of stuff and we've run a little bit over the hour. Is there anything else that anyone, whether you're watching or Amar or Pearl, is there anything else you'd like to share about this topic before we start wrapping up? Pearl, anything? You're all good? Okay, well, in that case, let's move to the question of the day. Question of the day. Here's a little question before we go on our way. So, Pearl and Amar, I've asked you a lot of questions. And is there a question that you'd like to now ask me and anyone watching in return? What would you like to ask us? Do you have a question? Pearl.
If you have a cat, what would you name them?
I mean, I would probably not name the cat for a while until I'd kind of given the cat a chance to express itself and like develop a personality. Because, for example, if it's a very aggressive cat, you don't want to call it Mittens. And if it's a, very, raggedy cat, you maybe don't want to call it Dr. Peabody.
It's true. Imagine if we did that with people.
I mean, people do get the chance to at some point change their names and stuff, and the important thing is that everyone respects that. But the cats, I mean, because they don't have a human voice, it's a bit more difficult. But yeah, to everyone out there, do you have a cat? If so, what's it called? If you don't, do you have a name that you have in mind for your cat? And alternatively, if someone is getting their next cat, what name would you ask them to consider? I'm going to ask them to consider, um, you know what? I'm going to say that I met a couple of cats. One is called Kittens, and that's the name of the cat. And the other cat is called Dr. Inspector Mittens, which was quite funny. And so I do like the extra grandiose title there. So I would ask people to consider maybe your cat is a professor, maybe it's a doctor, maybe it's an inspector, I don't know. But consider that. Amar, do you have any thoughts on this question?
I think I would like to name a cat something incredibly ordinary. Just something like Streetlight, something like that.
Hmm.
Because I think I would just enjoy that. I don't know why we don't use more ordinary things and turn them into names.
Like water
Streetlight.
bottle.
You're like water bottle. I think that's a lovely name.
Water
It's
bottle.
a little long. You
Water
might end up.
bottle.
Yeah, exactly. And people, imagine other people's reactions. They will think you're looking for a water bottle.
Water bottle. Water bottle. Or Glowtorch. I'm a big fan of random nouns for pet names, says Jane. My family cat growing up was Tabitha, and I had a cat called Arya with my ex as well. Thank you for sharing that. And we had a hamster called Rhubarb Crumble. Oh, that's a
Fantastic.
good name. I
Yeah.
do like that. Um,
Perhaps if I ever had a cat, I'd now have to name it after our game.
I think Streetlights is a good name. Anyway, so over to you. What are you up to? You can share Botsy if you want to. What are you up to? What are you doing today? What are you going to be getting up to? I am going to put on some socks and some slightly warmer clothes and then cycle about 45 minutes over to close to where I used to live to have an all-day gaming thing. I am going to be taking a game about auctioning cubes after winning an auction to become the auctioneer, which I me. This is how pretty the cards are. They're not pretty at all. They're just like they've got different colors to distinguish the player starts. You can barely see that actually. That's the yellow one. They're all exactly the same numbers. But then I tweaked the numbers, so now it goes up to 7. It used to only go up to 5. Anyway, I'll try that. I'll be playing some Roots, and I'll be playing, I'm sure, a whole bunch of other Lights games and talking about sharing time with people. We will be spending some physical time with people, which I'm very much looking forward to. What are you up to, y'all?
I am going to try and get out again because it's much easier on the weekend than on the weekday. But I think I'm going to be dodging rain as best as I possibly can. I like to imagine watching the raindrops fall and I literally hop between them, avoiding them. Probably less likely. I think I'll take an umbrella.
Mm-mm.
Oh, that makes my day sound less exciting. I've got some light admin to do, and then I'm going to video call my parents because they live on a different continent, so it has to be virtual.
You know what? I do. Before I leave, I am going to chuck some things into the washing machine and just hang it up when I get back tonight. Jane wants to say Slippers was another hamster name, which is very cute. And also, I'm heading to Leeds today. Then we'll be staying there until Thursday when I head to Harrogate for Aircon. So I'm packing all my red clothes. Thank you very much, Jane. I appreciate that. And Jane is going to be helping me out. And I'm excited. Yeah, I don't feel 100% prepared. I'm going to be getting some new printings of games tomorrow, which is, yeah, it's games that already exist, but they're just reprinted. And yeah, I'm looking forward to Aircon. So, recap and wrap up before we finish up. To recap and wrap up, we talked about Swiss rolls, Concordia, family walks. We talked about how Amar is dependable and jumps in when required, and organised game nights. And we talked about what makes a good game. It's thought-provoking, it makes you laugh and bonds and tells you something about the other players. We talked about how when you're in person, you might have a discussion about, hey, how was your journey? Hey, here's my cat. Do you want to fondle my cat? That sounds wrong. Um, but we talked about how online stuff are more agenda driven, sharing physical spaces. Online, only one person talks at a time, which can actually be quite a nice thing, but maybe you want that chaos of a more chaotic auction trading game, whatever. We talked about apps, Pearl is a like take it or leave it type person, but Tamar is more like, nope, I'm easily distracted. I don't want this in my games, and I want something where I'm able to talk. We talked about, yeah, the difference between focusing on the rules and the mechanisms, which is what often happens if I'm playing an abstract game of photosynthesis with someone online. It's 100% about, okay, me calculating where the things go and me planning a few moves ahead, compared to Codenames Duet, which is a lovely cooperative experience of how does this person, not anyone, but how does this person connect these words? And then we talked about the context and the preferences. Who are you playing with? What are you prioritizing? Handshakes are worse than hugs. You heard it here. And I mean, honestly, from every system, I mean, not only worse at spreading germs, but also, can I just get to a quick straw poll? Do you agree that handshakes are worse than hugs from an emotional bonding point of view? Um, okay, everyone's agreed on that. And we talked about testing, um, physical, verbal signals, the enforcement of the rules, moving from Among Us into a social deduction game with real cards, and games ultimately being all about the possibility space. And then we also talked about water bottle management, and pet names. Now, if you want to check me out, I'm obviously Stuff by Bez in all of the places, and you can check out my stuffbybez.com/streams if you want to check out where I am. But also, if you want to check out Pearl and Damar, I guess the important thing that you'd like to get people to check out is the Kickstarter. Could you explain what's going on for just a couple of minutes?
Yeah, so Kick of Doom is the game we were working on. It's for 3 to 6 players, plays in 15 to 30 minutes, ages 8 plus. It's a card game where aliens take over the world with kicks. It's a lovely choice for a bit of interaction. It's also a good filler if you're into sort of heavier games. I'm a bit more serious. We're going live on Kickstarter next Friday. We'll be at AirCon in person, but go ahead and find our Kickstarter link and click notify on launch so you won't miss out. If you want to find out more in general, go to www.kickoffdoom.com, and you can also find us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at KickoffDoomGame.
And I just want to say the reason that it's not notified is because this is on a different browser and I'm not logged in. But just if everyone's, why isn't Bez clicking that button? Yeah, I just want to mention that. But yeah, do go and check it out. And if you're at Terracon, obviously you can spend a bit of time saying, is this a game for me? Play it. If you have fun, then you can back it. And when do you think people will get their copies, and how much is the game going to be?
The base game will be at £20. There's optional add-ons like a game mat. We also have a lovely tier that we're excited about where you can help us design the art on for Kick, Alien, or Sabotage. We think that'll be a lot of fun. We are expecting to deliver by October this year. It will be printed in the UK, so there's no straight time, and we're hoping to get it to you very quickly this way.
Are you printing with Rob Butler?
Yes, indeed.
Okay, so I want to say and that was, I believe, the same that I use for my Bezzy bargain bags, but also was done for Tranquility. And I should just mention that obviously the Bezzy bargain bags are done in the cheapest possible way, whereas this will not be. And so if you look at Tranquility, you'll get an idea of the final card quality from friends of the show. So at this point, I want to say thank you, everyone, for being here. Thank you, Amar and Pearl, for chatting. Please, everyone, go and share, spread the word. And the only thing left to say at this point is lots of love. And as always, bye, 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 bye. This is a goodbye song. Blue, blue, bye, 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 bye. Thank you for watching along. Bye, 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 bye. This is the end of the show. Bye, 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 and now it's time to go. Bye, 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 this is a good song. Bye, 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 thank you for watching along. Bye, 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 this is the end of the show. Bye, 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 and now it's time to go. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.